3 days earlier, Keisha Moore sat in her Atlanta law office, staring at numbers that didn't add up. Harvard law degree on the wall, corner office with a view, but none of it mattered when the hospital called. Miss Moore, your mother's condition has worsened. Without the experimental treatment, we're looking at weeks, not months, $200,000. Have you ever had someone judge you before they even knew your name? Before they saw your worth? Because what happened next? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She had kept one thing sacred for 28 years, until the day she walked into a sterile office ready to trade it for her mother's life. I just want a quiet ceremony. Nothing dramatic, billionaire tech mogul Bryce Whitmore told the wedding planner. But as he adjusted his cufflinks, he leaned closer and muttered, half joking, I just hope she's not black. The planner froze. What Bryce didn't know was, his bride already heard him. She was standing behind the curtain, dressed in silk and secrets. Have you ever had someone judge you before they even knew your name? Before they saw your worth? Because what happened next proves that sometimes the person who destroys your dignity becomes your ticket to survival. This wasn't just a contract wedding. It was a setup. And when Bryce finally lifted that veil, the look on his face wasn't just shock, it was recognition. What would you do if marrying your worst memory was the only way to save your future? Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 3 days earlier, Keisha Moore sat in her Atlanta law office, staring at numbers that didn't add up. Harvard law degree on the wall, corner office with a view, but none of it mattered when the hospital called. Miss Moore, your mother's condition has worsened. Without the experimental treatment, we're looking at weeks, not months. $200,000. That's what it would take to save the woman who raised her alone, worked 3 jobs to put her through school, never once complained when Keisha chose books over boys, ambition over comfort. The law firm's conference room gleamed with mahogany and privilege, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta's skyline, a view that cost more per square foot than most people made in a year. It's unusual, the senior partner admitted, sliding the contract across polished wood. But the client specifically requested someone of your qualifications. Marriage contract, 6 months. Professional arrangement only. The compensation would cover her mother's treatment twice over. The groom's name? Bryce Whitmore, tech mogul from Austin. You'll meet him at the ceremony. She'd built her entire adult life around never needing anyone, never accepting charity, never being that desperate girl from the Atlanta projects who watched her mother cry over unpaid bills. But watching someone you love fade away changes the math on pride. Her phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. Treatment needs to start Monday or we lose the window. Monday, 3 days away. She thought about all the men who'd tried to buy pieces of her over the years. Rich clients who offered more than legal fees. Colleagues who suggested dinner could lead to partnership tracks. She'd said no to all of them, kept herself whole, kept her choices her own. What would you sacrifice for someone you love? How far would you go before crossing your own moral boundaries? Drop your thoughts below. The pen felt heavy in her hand. Each letter of her signature felt like selling something she'd never get back. As she signed the marriage contract, reading the groom's name for the first time, her pen froze mid-signature. Bryce Whitmore, the same voice that had called her a nobody 5 years ago, was about to become her husband. The man who had humiliated her in a Tulsa diner, left her standing there with tears in her eyes and no tip on the table, was now offering her everything she needed. The contract trembled in her hands. This wasn't just about saving her mother anymore. This was about facing the ghost that had driven every success, every late night studying, every wall she'd built around her heart. The richest man in Austin was about to marry a stranger, until he discovered she wasn't a stranger at all. Bryce Whitmore stood in his penthouse office 40 floors above downtown Austin, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. The inheritance clause his grandfather had written decades ago seemed like a joke until the lawyers made it clear. Marry by 35 or lose $400 million. At 34 and 11 months, time had run out for finding love. So he'd found a contract instead. The bride is here for her final fitting, his assistant announced through the intercom. He'd chosen not to meet her beforehand. Keep it clean, professional, businesslike. She needed money. He needed a wife for 6 months. Simple transaction. The bridal suite buzzed with activity, silk, pearls, and nervous energy filling the space like expensive perfume. Behind ivory curtains, Keisha's reflection stared back from antique mirrors. But the woman looking back wasn't the desperate waitress from Tulsa anymore. This was Dr. Keisha Moore, Esquire. Harvard Law Review. Corner office. 7-figure salary. And she was about to marry the man who'd called her nothing. Through the thin fabric, she heard his voice consulting with a wedding planner about flowers, music, photographs. All the details of a ceremony that would mean everything and nothing at the same time. Any special requests for the reception? The planner asked. Just keep it simple, Bryce replied, loosening his collar. The August heat was getting to him, or maybe it was the nerves. Nothing too flashy. And honestly, he glanced toward the curtained area where his bride was getting ready, not knowing she could hear every word. I just hope she's not black. The words hung in the air like poison. The seamstress's hands stopped moving. The wedding planner's smile froze. Even the photographer looked uncomfortable. But behind the curtain, Keisha's hands clenched into fists. Every fear she'd buried about that night in Oklahoma came flooding back. Every doubt about whether she'd really changed, really grown, really become someone who mattered. Have you ever had someone judge you based on your appearance before knowing your heart? Share your experience below. She stared at herself in the mirror. The wedding dress cost more than her mother's monthly medication. The woman wearing it had argued cases before federal judges, negotiated million-dollar deals, earned respect from every corner of her profession. But to him, she was still just a category, a color, a concern. The fitting room door opened and the wedding planner entered, face flushed with embarrassment. I'm so sorry about that. He's just nervous. Wedding day jitters make people say things they don't mean. Do they? Keisha's voice was steady, controlled. Years of courtroom training kept her emotions locked away. Or do they make people say things they usually keep to themselves? I'm sure he didn't. It's fine. She smoothed the silk over her hips, watching how the dress transformed her silhouette. Everyone has preferences, but it wasn't fine. It was confirmation of everything she'd suspected about men like him. Rich enough to buy solutions to problems, privileged enough to have opinions about people they'd never bothered to know. The irony was perfect. He was worried about marrying someone black, not knowing he was about to marry the specific black woman he'd already destroyed once before. When the veil lifted and their eyes met for the first time in 5 years, recognition hit them both like lightning. But while his face showed shock, hers revealed something far more dangerous, calculated satisfaction. The game was about to begin, and she already knew how it would end. She'd spent 5 years transforming herself from his victim into his equal. But standing at the altar, she realized she'd become something else entirely, his judge. The chapel buzzed with Austin's elite, designer suits and diamond jewelry, catching afternoon lights streaming through stained glass windows. Two families who'd never met, pretending to celebrate a union that existed only on paper. Bryce stood at the altar, his confidence shaken by the woman walking toward him. Something about her was familiar, unsettling. The way she held her shoulders, the determined set of her jaw, the complete absence of nervousness that should come with marrying a stranger. Keisha moved down the aisle like she owned it. Every step calculated, every breath controlled. The woman in white wasn't trembling or tearful or playing the blushing bride. She was walking into battle wearing silk and carrying flowers. Do you, Bryce Whitmore, take this woman? The words washed over them while their eyes locked in silent conversation, his confusion growing with each second of recognition that wouldn't quite form. Her satisfaction building as she watched him struggle with memories he couldn't place. Do you, Keisha Moore, take this man? Take him? She'd already taken everything that mattered. His peace of mind, his comfortable assumptions, his ability to dismiss the consequences of careless cruelty. Edo. The lie came easily. She'd been practicing it for days. When he lifted her veil, the chapel fell silent. Not the reverent quiet of ceremony, but the stunned silence of recognition hitting like a physical blow. "Tulsa," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. Her smile never wavered. "Hello, Bryce." The country club reception sparkled with crystal chandeliers and social performance. Austin's elite sipping champagne while measuring the new couple for gossip value, unaware they were witnessing the opening act of a 5-year reckoning. She played her part perfectly, gracious with his colleagues, charming with their wives, intelligent enough to hold conversations about business and art and politics. Everything a billionaire's wife should be. But every smile she gave the guests was a weapon sharpened by years of humiliation. Every gracious nod a reminder that the nobody he'd dismissed now wore his last name. "You look stunning," his business partner commented, raising his champagne glass. "Bryce is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," she replied smoothly. "It's amazing how life brings you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it." Bryce's grip tightened on his glass. The double meaning wasn't lost on him. During their first dance, the string quartet played something romantic and meaningless while photographers captured their fairy tale moment. His hand rested on her waist, hers on his shoulder, both of them moving through the motions of happiness. "You remind me of someone I met once," he said, still fishing for confirmation of what he already knew. "I have that kind of face." Her voice was honey over steel. "People always think they know me from somewhere." But the way his grip tightened on her waist told her he was starting to remember. The pieces clicking together. The waitress in Tulsa who'd served him coffee and hope, only to have him throw both back in her face. That night in Oklahoma, he started. It was a long time ago. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "But some things you never forget, do you? What's the difference between justice and revenge? Between standing up for yourself and tearing someone down? Tell me your thoughts." The music swelled around them. Cameras flashed, guests smiled, and applauded the beautiful couple lost in their romantic moment. None of them could see the war being declared in whispered words and meaningful glances. None of them knew that this marriage wasn't just a beginning. It was a reckoning 5 years in the making. And she had all the time in the world to make sure he understood exactly what he'd lost that night in Tulsa and what it was going to cost him to get it back. Moving into his mansion felt like entering enemy territory, until she realized she'd been preparing for this battle longer than he'd been building his fortress. Bryce's Austin penthouse spread across the top floor like a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline. Modern art worth more than her law school tuition. Silence so expensive it echoed. "The master suite is through here," he said, carrying her single suitcase. "But per our contract, you'll have the guest room. Complete privacy, separate bathroom, your own entrance if you prefer. Professional, distant, like he was showing a client around investment property. This place is beautiful," she said, surveying the pristine living room. "But where do you actually live?" The question hit him harder than intended. Every surface was magazine perfect, every corner designed by professionals who'd never asked what he actually liked, only what would impress. "I guess I haven't figured that out yet." She walked to the windows, Austin spreading below them like scattered diamonds on black velvet. 40 floors up, you can see everything but touch nothing. Is that supposed to mean something? Just an observation. She turned back to him, and for a moment, her lawyer mask slipped. "We're both pretty good at keeping distance, aren't we?" That night, she unpacked in the guest room that was larger than her first apartment. Designer furniture, Egyptian cotton sheets, fresh flowers arranged by a service she'd never afford. But it felt like a beautiful prison. Around midnight, hunger drove her to the kitchen. She'd skipped dinner at the reception, too focused on performance to eat. Now her stomach was demanding attention. She found him there first, standing barefoot in pajama pants, making a sandwich with the focused concentration of someone who didn't usually do things for himself. "Can't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. "Weddings are exhausting." She opened the refrigerator, grateful for something normal to do, especially fake ones. He handed her half of his sandwich without being asked. Turkey and Swiss on bread that probably cost more per loaf than she used to spend on groceries for a week. They ate in silence, Two strangers sharing midnight space in a kitchen bigger than most people's homes. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "You can ask." "That night in Tulsa." "Well, I said to you." "How bad was it?" She set down her sandwich, considering her words carefully. The truth was a weapon she could use now or save for later. "You want to know if you broke me? I want to know if I can fix it. Have you ever walked into someone's home and immediately understood who they really are? What did their space tell you that their words couldn't?" She looked around the kitchen. Professional-grade appliances that had never cooked a family meal. Breakfast bar with stools that had never hosted friends. Refrigerator full of takeout containers from restaurants that delivered to penthouses. You can't fix something by throwing money at it, Bryce. Some damage requires actual work. Then tell me what kind of work. The kind that starts with understanding why you said it in the first place. He leaned against the counter, studying her face in the soft kitchen lighting. She was beautiful, obviously, but there was something else. Intelligence, strength, a kind of dignity that couldn't be purchased or performed. "I was angry that night," he admitted. "My startup was failing. My father was threatening to cut me off. Everything I'd worked for was falling apart. And there you were, so kind, so patient, asking if I needed anything else. And that made you want to hurt me? That made me want to hurt someone who couldn't hurt me back." The honesty surprised her. Most men spent years avoiding that level of self-awareness. "At least you're not pretending it was an accident." While unpacking her law books later, a photo fell from between pages. Her and her mother at her Harvard graduation. When Bryce saw it on the counter the next morning, something clicked in his expression. "Tulsa," he whispered, and her blood ran cold. The game had officially begun. The moment he said Tulsa, 5 years of careful planning crystallized into one terrifying possibility. What if her revenge had already begun working before she'd even started? They sat on opposite ends of his massive sectional like negotiators at a peace treaty. Austin traffic humming 40 floors below while the past settled between them like an uninvited guest. "I remember you now," he said, holding her graduation photo. "Harvard Law Review, right? You were studying for the bar exam, working nights to pay for prep courses." She'd forgotten she'd told him that. 5 years ago, when she still believed in the kindness of strangers, she'd shared pieces of her story with a customer who seemed interested. "You have a good memory for someone who was drunk." "I wasn't that drunk. I was just—" He set the photo down carefully. "I was drowning in my own failures, and I pulled you down with me." Pretty words. She pulled her knees up, defensive posture automatic. But words don't pay medical bills or erase humiliation. No, they don't. He moved slightly closer on the couch. "But they're a start." "A start to what?" "To whatever this is." He gestured between them. "Because we both know this isn't just about a contract anymore. When someone who wronged you tries to apologize without fully admitting what they did, how do you respond? Is partial accountability enough?" She studied his face, looking for the cruel drunk who'd called her nothing. Instead, she saw a man wrestling with guilt he'd carried longer than she'd expected. "Tell me exactly what you remember about that night. You were working a double shift. Your feet hurt. I could tell by the way you moved. You brought me coffee I didn't deserve and asked if I was okay when anyone else would have avoided the angry customer in booth 7. The details surprised her. She'd assumed he'd been too self-absorbed to notice anything beyond his own problems. And then, his jaw tightened. "I said things designed to make you feel as worthless as I felt. I called you names that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with my own insecurities." "What names?" "You want me to repeat them? I want you to face what you did." The silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of consequences. "I called you a nobody," he said finally. "Said you'd always be serving people better than you, that you should be grateful for the opportunity to be around success, even someone else's." The words hit just as hard the second time, but now she had armor. "And then you left without tipping. And then I left without tipping." She absorbed this, cataloging his shame against her own memories of that night. How she'd gone home and cried for hours. How she'd called her mother, sobbing about whether she was really good enough for law school, for anything better than serving coffee to people who saw her as furniture. "That night changed everything for me," she said quietly. "Change how?" It became my fuel. Every late night studying, every exam, every job interview, every time someone underestimated me, I heard your voice calling me nobody. And I used it to prove you wrong. He absorbed this, understanding dawning in his expression. So in a way, I helped make you who you are. In a way, you gave me something to fight against. They looked at each other across the expensive couch, both recognizing the strange alchemy that had transformed cruelty into strength. Does that make what I did less wrong? No, she said honestly, but it makes what happened next more complicated. That night, she found him standing in his home office, holding a framed photo of his family, the same photo that had been on his restaurant table in Tulsa. You were there, he said without turning around. You were our waitress. The game had officially begun. But looking at him now, shoulders bent with guilt he'd carried for years, she wondered if she was still playing the same game she'd started. The truth exploded between them like a dam bursting. 5 years of buried humiliation flooding the pristine space between his guilt and her rage. You remember everything, don't you? She said, stepping into his office. The family photo trembled in his hands. Every word. He set the frame down carefully, like it might break. Every cruel, stupid thing I said to someone who didn't deserve it. Someone who was working 2 jobs to pay for law school. Someone whose mother was in the hospital. Someone who smiled at you anyway, because that's what good people do. Her voice stayed steady, but her hand was shaking. 5 years of practicing this conversation in mirrors, in courtrooms, in moments when sleep wouldn't come. Keisha, do you know what happened after you left that night? He turned to face her, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Real pain. Not the surface guilt of getting caught, but the deep shame of someone who'd looked in the mirror and hated what they saw. Tell me. I went home and threw up. Stress, exhaustion, humiliation. My body just gave up. Then I called my mother, crying so hard she couldn't understand me, for 10 minutes. The living room became a courtroom, 40 floors above Austin, where she finally got to cross-examine the man who'd shattered her self-worth in a diner booth half a decade ago. She asked me what happened, and you know what I told her? That maybe I wasn't smart enough for law school. Maybe I should quit, save everyone the embarrassment of watching me fail. But you didn't quit. No, I didn't quit. You know why? He waited, afraid of the answer, because she told me that anyone who could make me doubt myself that easily didn't know me at all. And anyone who would try to break a stranger's spirit was already broken themselves. What's more powerful? An apology that costs nothing or one that requires someone to face who they used to be. Have you ever confronted someone who changed your life without meaning to? He absorbed this, understanding the full weight of that night for the first time. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She is, and she's dying because I can't afford the treatment that might save her. The words hung between them like an accusation. Is that why you agreed to marry me? For the money. I agreed to marry you because I needed $200,000 and you needed a wife. The fact that you're the same man who called me nobody? That's just life being funny. Funny or cruel? Both. She moved closer, and he could see the little girl who'd been told she wasn't good enough, fighting with a woman who'd proven everyone wrong. I spent 5 years becoming someone you couldn't dismiss. Harvard Law Review, federal clerkship, corner office, 7-figure salary. I built myself into everything you said I'd never be. You were already those things, he said quietly. I was just too stupid and drunk and angry to see them. Were you? She stepped closer still. Or were you exactly who you are when no one's watching? The question hit him like a physical blow. Because she was right. That night in Tulsa, he'd shown his true face. The privileged, entitled, casually cruel face he'd spent years learning to hide behind manners and charity donations and progressive politics. You want to know what I think? She continued. I think you spent 5 years feeling guilty about who you really are. And I think marrying me was your chance at absolution. Maybe you're right. Maybe you are right. He sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 35 years. I've thought about you almost every day since that night. Wondered if you made it through law school, if you became the lawyer you wanted to be, if you remembered me at all. Well, now you know. She kissed him to shut him up, to stop his apologies, to make him feel as exposed as she'd felt that night in Oklahoma. But when he responded with equal desperation, kissing her like a drowning man, she realized this wasn't about punishment anymore. His hands found her face, gentle despite the hunger in his kiss. She tasted 5 years of regret on his lips, felt 5 years of her own anger dissolving into something more dangerous. Want. They moved together like people who'd been waiting their whole lives for this moment. Not the careful contract partners they'd agreed to be, but two people finally admitting what they'd both been running from. He lifted her onto his desk, scattering papers and pens, his mouth finding the pulse point at her throat. "Tell me to stop," he whispered against her skin. "No, this doesn't change anything. I'm still going to destroy you," she said afterward, wrapped in his shirt, her head on his chest. But when he kissed her forehead and replied, "I know. I probably deserve it," something shifted in her chest that felt dangerously like forgiveness. Sleeping with your enemy was supposed to be simple, until you wake up and realize you've been fighting the wrong war. Morning came too early and not early enough. Keisha woke up in his bed, wearing his shirt, with his arm around her waist like they were lovers instead of business partners with complicated history. The night felt like a dream until she moved and felt muscles she'd forgotten she had. Then it felt like a mistake. "Good morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. She slipped out of bed, gathering her clothes. "We shouldn't have done that." Why not? Because it felt real. Because she'd forgotten to hate him somewhere between his hands and her hair and his name on her lips. Because for 3 hours, she'd been just a woman with a man who wanted her, not a victim planning revenge. Because it complicates things. Her phone rang before he could respond. "The hospital. Miss Moore? I'm calling about your mother's condition." Her blood went cold. "What's wrong?" "She's taken a turn. You need to come to Atlanta immediately." The world tilted. Everything else, the marriage, the contract, the revenge, became background noise to the sound of her mother's heart monitor beeping through the phone. "I have to go." She was already pulling on yesterday's dress, looking for her keys, her purse, her ability to think straight. "I'll come with you." "No." The word came out harsher than she intended. "This is family business. You're my wife." On paper, the hospital hallway stretched endlessly under harsh lighting, medical antiseptic mixing with human desperation, a smell she knew too well from years of her mother's treatments. Her mother looked smaller than she remembered, lost in a bed designed for much larger problems. But her eyes were alert, knowing. "Baby girl," she whispered, squeezing Keisha's hand. "You look different." "Different how?" "Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down." Keisha almost laughed. If only it were that simple. "Mama, the doctors say the treatment isn't working as fast as they hoped." "Doctors say a lot of things, but I know what I know." Her mother's grip tightened. "That man you married. Tell me about him. How do you explain marrying someone for revenge to the woman who taught you that hatred only hurts the person carrying it?" "It's complicated. Love usually is." "It's not love, Mama. It's business." Her mother's laugh turned into a cough, but her eyes stayed bright. "Child, I've been married. I know the difference between business and the way you're glowing right now. Have you ever started something for one reason and realized halfway, through your motivation, had completely changed? Share your story of unexpected transformation." That night, alone in her childhood bedroom, Keisha stared at her phone. 17 missed calls for Bryce. 12 text messages asking if she was okay, if her mother was okay, if she needed anything. The last message was simple. "I'm here when you're ready." Not pushing, not demanding, just present. She called him at midnight. "How is she?" he asked without saying hello. "Scared, trying not to show it." Like mother, like daughter. What's that supposed to mean? You're both stronger than you think you need to be. When she returned to Austin 3 days later, she found he'd arranged for the country's top specialist to consult on her mother's case. Not because their contract required it, but because he'd spent 3 sleepless nights researching her mother's condition. The revenge she'd planned suddenly felt less satisfying than the man standing in his kitchen making her tea. Some contracts bind you to people. Others bind you to versions of yourself you're ready to outgrow. They walked through Austin's downtown district as evening painted the sky orange and purple, city sound creating a backdrop for conversations they'd both been avoiding. "Your mother's treatment is working," he said, hands in his pockets like a teenager afraid to reach for her hand. "The doctors are optimistic." She kept her voice neutral, but relief colored every word. "Thank you for arranging the consultations." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You didn't have to do that." "Maybe I wanted to." They stopped at a red light, surrounded by evening commuters heading home to families, to dinners, to lives that made sense. Normal people with normal problems. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything. When you arranged our marriage, did you know it was me?" The question had been eating at her for days. Too much coincidence, too perfect a setup. "No." His answer came quickly, honestly. "I told my lawyers I needed someone smart, professional, uninterested in anything beyond the contract terms. They found you. And the fact that I'm black didn't come up until the wedding day." She studied his face, looking for lies. Found only embarrassment. "So your racist comment to the wedding planner was genuine surprise, not planned cruelty." "Genuine stupidity," he corrected. "I spent 5 years thinking about the woman I'd hurt in Tulsa, wondering if she was okay, and then I almost ruined everything again with the same kind of thoughtless prejudice." When was the last time someone surprised you by choosing growth over comfort? When did someone's change make you question your own assumptions? They found a bench in a small park, Austin's skyline glittering around them like scattered stars. "What happens when 6 months is up and you get your inheritance?" she asked. The question he'd been dreading. "What happens if I don't want you to leave?" The honesty surprised them both. Then we're both in trouble. "Why trouble?" She turned to face him fully. This man who'd been her worst enemy and was becoming something she didn't have words for. "Because I came here to destroy you, and somewhere along the way, I started caring whether you deserved it." "And do I deserve it?" The question hung between them like a bridge they were both afraid to cross. "The man who hurt me in Tulsa?" "Yes." "The man who arranged medical care for my mother without being asked?" "That's a different person." "What if they're the same person? What if I'm both the man who can be cruel and the man who wants to do better?" She considered this, measuring his words against her own journey from victim to victor to whatever she was becoming now. "Then I guess the question is which man shows up more often." A homeless veteran approached their bench, asking for change. Without hesitation, Bryce pulled out his wallet, but instead of just handing over money, he asked the man's name, where he'd served, what he needed beyond cash. 5 minutes later, he'd arranged for the veteran to get a job interview at one of his company's partner firms. "You do that often?" she asked after the man left with business card and hope. "More often lately." "Since when?" "Since I married someone who makes me want to be worth her time." His family's emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following week. The same week her mother's surgery was planned. When he asked if she wanted him to postpone his business to be with her in Atlanta, she realized she was no longer the same woman who'd signed their contract. Neither was he the same man who'd humiliated her in Oklahoma. She built her entire adult life around proving she wasn't nobody until the day someone made her feel like everything without needing proof. Atlanta General Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos. Nurses moving between rooms like dancers in scrubs, machines beeping rhythms of hope and fear, families clinging to each other in waiting areas designed for temporary occupation. Keisha's mother was scheduled for surgery in 2 hours, and Bryce was there, standing in the hallway holding coffee and looking completely out of place in his expensive suit among people wearing their hearts on the outside. "You came," she said, surprise coloring her voice. "You asked me to." "No, I didn't." "You said you were scared." "That was asking." The surgery waiting room became their unlikely sanctuary. Plastic chairs and vending machine coffee transforming into the place where pretense finally died and truth took its first breath. Her mother had insisted on meeting him before going under anesthesia. "So you're the one," she said, studying Bryce like he was evidence in a case she was trying. "Yes, ma'am." "The one who hurt my baby, or the one who married her?" "Both." The honesty surprised everyone, including him. "And which one are you today?" "Today I'm the man who wants to spend the rest of his life making sure she never doubts her worth again." Her mother nodded, satisfied. Good answer. But remember, I'll be watching you from wherever mothers go to keep an eye on their children. The surgery took 4 hours. 4 hours of bad coffee and small talk and Bryce learning that Keisha had been valedictorian of her high school class, that she'd worked 3 jobs to pay for college, that she'd never brought a man home to meet her mother before. Not even for fake marriages? He asked. Especially not for fake marriages. When the doctor emerged with good news, surgery successful, prognosis excellent, full recovery expected, Keisha collapsed into Bryce's arms and cried for the first time since she was 12 years old. He held her while she shook, stroking her hair, whispering words that didn't matter because his presence said everything. That night, in the hotel room across from the hospital, she initiated everything. She kissed him first, unbuttoning his shirt with hands that trembled not from nerves, but from finally admitting what she wanted. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her eyes. "I'm sure about this." She pushed his shirt off his shoulders. "I'm sure about you being here when I needed you. I'm sure about the way you look at my mother like she matters. She does matter. I'm sure about the way you look at me. How do I look at you? Like you see everything I am and everything I could be. What's the difference between someone seeing your potential and someone accepting your reality? Which matters more in love?" She guided him to the bed, taking control in a way that felt natural, necessary. For once, she was setting the pace, and he followed her lead like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to do. When he whispered, "I love you," against her neck, she didn't hesitate. "I love you too." The words surprised them both with their honesty. Later, wrapped in hotel sheets that smelled like industrial detergent and hope, she traced patterns on his chest. "My mother asked me something today," she said. "What?" "She asked if you were someone who came into my life to teach me a lesson, or someone who came to help me forget the lessons I didn't need anymore." "What did you tell her?" "That maybe you're both." He tilted her chin up, studying her face in the dim light filtering through hotel curtains. "What lesson am I helping you forget? That I'm not worth fighting for. And what lesson am I teaching you? That some fights are worth having together." Walking back to their hotel room, the next morning, paparazzi photos flashing around them, she squeezed his hand and made a decision that surprised even her. "When we get back to Austin, I want to renegotiate our contract." His smile was worth more than any revenge she'd ever planned. "What kind of renegotiation?" "The kind where we stop pretending this is temporary. Introducing your fake husband to your real life was supposed to be simple, until both became more authentic than you'd ever imagined." The private jet back to Austin felt different than the flight to Atlanta. Less like transportation, more like transition from one version of their lives to another. "Your mother likes me," Bryce said, scrolling through emails he'd been ignoring. "My mother likes everyone until they prove they don't deserve it. How long do I have to prove myself? She'll let you know." Austin welcomed them back with Texas heat and a stack of messages from lawyers, board members, and society reporters who'd noticed their hospital photos. Apparently, crying in your husband's arms was newsworthy when your husband was worth $400 million. The country club board meeting buzzed with tension as Austin's old money elite assessed their newest member's wife. Designer clothes couldn't hide their discomfort with change, just like her Harvard credentials couldn't erase their assumptions. "Mrs. Whitmore," the club president said, her name sounding foreign in his mouth. "We understand you'll be taking a more active role in Bryce's business interests." "That's right. And your background in law. What type of law exactly?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. She could feel Bryce tense beside her, ready to defend her, but she'd been defending herself long before she met him. "Corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, federal compliance. The kind that keeps rich people out of prison." Nervous laughter rippled around the table. "How refreshing," the president's wife murmured. "Someone who understands the complexities of wealth management. Have you ever watched someone stand up for you when it cost them something important? How did it change your relationship?" Later that week, the company board voted to make her chief legal officer, a position that would give her access to everything, including the inheritance clause that started their arrangement. "Conflict of interest?" she asked Bryce privately. "Only if you plan to sue me. I might if you keep leaving dirty dishes in the sink." I'll hire a housekeeper, where you could wash your own dishes like a grown man. Revolutionary concept. Their banter had evolved from careful politeness to the kind of comfortable teasing that suggested permanence. Like they were building something together instead of just surviving a contract. But with power came scrutiny. The business rival Harrison Mills had been circling Whitmore Industries like a vulture, waiting for weakness. Keisha's appointment as CLO gave him ammunition. Nepotism at its finest, he told reporters outside the courthouse where they'd filed regulatory challenges. Marrying your lawyer is creative, I'll give him that. Actually, Keisha said, stepping up to the microphone cluster, marrying your equal is just good business. Something you might understand if you'd ever met one. That night, they celebrated her first public verbal takedown of a rival with champagne and Chinese takeout on his penthouse terrace. You destroyed him, Bryce said admiringly. I was just getting started. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Too late for that. But she was smiling when she said it, and he was smiling when he kissed her, and neither of them was pretending anymore. The terrace doors were open. Austin's night sounds drifting up from street level. They made love on the outdoor sofa like teenagers who discovered privacy, her dress hiked up around her waist, his hands tangled in her hair. I love you, he said afterward, both of them still breathing hard. I love you too. The words came easier each time, like a language they were both learning to speak fluently. What happens to your revenge plan? He asked, tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder. I'm thinking of pivoting to a happiness plan. How's that working out? Better than expected. The private investigator's report landed on rival board member Harrison's desk like a bomb. Subject wife has detailed knowledge of previous business dealings that could expose inheritance fraud dating back 3 generations. The war for Bryce's fortune was about to become a battle for their survival. The private investigator's report sat on Harrison Mills' mahogany desk like a loaded weapon. 20 pages of financial records, family secrets, and enough evidence to destroy 3 generations of Whitmore wealth. This is interesting, Harrison murmured, flipping through bank statement from the 1970s. Very interesting indeed. Bryce's grandfather hadn't just built the family fortune through tech innovation. He'd done it through systematic fraud, stealing patents from smaller competitors, bribing government officials, and using shell companies to hide millions in illegal profits. The inheritance clause requiring marriage by 35 wasn't about family values. It was insurance. A desperate old man's attempt to ensure his grandson would be tied to someone who couldn't testify against him in federal court. But Keisha wasn't just anyone. She was a federal prosecutor's dream. Harvard-trained, ethically minded, and now with complete access to every Whitmore business record. Harrison picked up his phone. Give me the district attorney's office. I have information about the Whitmore case they've been building. Meanwhile, 40 floors above Austin, Keisha was discovering the same information from the inside. The corporate files she'd been reviewing as chief legal officer told a story of corruption stretching back decades. Falsified environmental reports, bribed senators, stolen technology, destroyed lives. Bryce, she called from his home office. We need to talk. He found her surrounded by bankers' boxes, financial records spread across every surface like evidence at a crime scene. What is all this? Your inheritance. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Do you know what your grandfather really did to build this company? The color drained from his face as she walked him through decades of documented crimes. Each revelation hit him like a physical blow. I had no idea, he whispered. I swear to you, I had no idea. I believe you, but that doesn't change what we're looking at. Have you ever discovered that something you inherited came with a price you never agreed to pay? How do you handle the weight of other people's choices? She showed him the worst of it. A 1978 memo detailing how his grandfather had stolen renewable energy patents from a small black-owned engineering firm, then used legal intimidation to force them out of business. The Morrison family, she read from the file, lost everything. The father died of a heart attack during the court battle. The son ended up homeless. Keisha, that son is now 70 years old and living in a nursing home that Medicaid barely covers. The implications settled between them like poison. What do you want me to do? What's right? That night, they sat on their terrace with Austin spread below them like a city made of guilt and consequences. If we report this, I lose everything, he said quietly. The company, the money, the inheritance. All of it. And if we don't, we become accessories to 40 years of theft and corruption. She took his hand, studying his face in the city lights. What kind of man do you want to be? The kind who deserves you. Then you already know what we have to do. The next morning, they walked into the FBI field office together. Keisha carried a box of evidence. Bryce carried a prepared statement confessing everything he knew and waiving all claims to attorney-client privilege. We want to make a deal, Keisha told the federal prosecutor. Full cooperation in exchange for immunity for my husband. He's a victim in this too. And what do you get out of it, Mrs. Whitmore? A clean conscience and a husband I can respect. The prosecutor smiled. That's not how federal cooperation usually works. Then let me explain how this is going to work. Her voice shifted into courtroom mode. My husband inherited a criminal enterprise without knowing it. We're handing you evidence to prosecute the real criminals. In return, he keeps his freedom and enough assets to make restitution to the victims. And if we refuse, then you get nothing, and we disappear into witness protection with enough evidence to embarrass the Justice Department for decades. The FBI agent leaning against the wall straightened up. She's serious. Dead serious, Keisha confirmed. I didn't spend 5 years building my legal career to throw it away protecting criminals, even if I'm married to their heir. That afternoon, Harrison Mills received a call from his contact at the DA's office. We don't need your information anymore. The Whitmores just handed us everything on a silver platter. The war for Bryce's fortune had just become a battle for their survival, and they'd fired the first shot themselves. Turning in your own family's crimes was supposed to feel righteous, until the consequences started destroying innocent people who depended on your silence. The Whitmore Industries headquarters buzzed with federal agents, cardboard boxes, and the kind of controlled chaos that comes with executing search warrants on Fortune 500 companies. Employees lined the hallways watching their jobs disappear into evidence bags. Mrs. Whitmore. Agent Martinez approached Keisha's temporary office. We need to discuss the pension fund. Her stomach dropped. What about it? Your husband's grandfather didn't just steal from competitors. He borrowed heavily from employee retirement accounts to fund his acquisitions. If we seize all assets, 1,200 people lose their entire retirement savings. She stared at the files spread across her desk. Every page represented someone's stolen future, but saving the company meant protecting crimes that went back decades. How much do we need to keep the pension fund intact? $50 million minimum. And if we liquidate everything, the employees get nothing. Your husband gets nothing. The victims of the original crimes get nothing. Only the lawyers get paid. That night, she found Bryce standing in their empty kitchen. The federal agents had seized all accounts, frozen all credit cards, and locked down every asset pending investigation. They were eating takeout pizza with plastic forks because the silverware had been inventoried as potential evidence. 1,200 people, he said without looking up. I know, 1,200 families who trusted my grandfather with their future. She sat beside him on the floor, both of them leaning against cabinets that might not be theirs much longer. What if we made a mistake, he asked. What if doing the right thing just created more victims? Have you ever tried to fix something broken only to discover your solution broke something else? How do you choose between competing versions of right and wrong? Her phone rang. Harrison Mills. Keisha, darling. I hear you've had some excitement at the office. What do you want, Harrison? To make you an offer. I'm prepared to buy Whitmore Industries for enough money to cover all debts, save the pension fund, and leave you and your husband with a comfortable future. In exchange for what? Dropping the federal cooperation, letting sleeping dogs lie. She looked at Bryce, who was listening to every word. And the victims of your grandfather's crimes? Ancient history. Most of them are dead anyway. Not all of them. The ones who are left will never know what they lost. That night, they drove to the nursing home where James Morrison lived, the son of the engineer whose patents had been stolen, whose business had been destroyed, whose father had died fighting Whitmore Industries. They found him in the common room, watching television with volume turned up too loud for ears that had stopped working properly decades ago. Mr. Morrison? Keisha knelt beside his wheelchair. My name is Keisha Whitmore. This is my husband, Bryce. The old man studied their faces with eyes that had seen too much disappointment to trust easily. Whitmore. His voice was paper-thin but sharp. I know that name. Yes, sir. We're here because of what happened to your father, to your family, to your company. He listened as they explained everything. The stolen patents, the legal intimidation, the decades of profits built on his family's stolen work. When they finished, he was quiet for so long they wondered if he'd fallen asleep. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth. And because we want to make it right. Can't bring back my father. No, sir. But we can make sure his work is finally recognized. And we can make sure you're taken care of. The old man looked between them, measuring their sincerity against a lifetime of broken promises. What's it going to cost you? Everything. Good. His smile was sharp as winter. Everything is what it cost me. Walking back to their car, Bryce squeezed her hand. No second thoughts. None. You. Just one. I wish I'd met you sooner. Why? Because maybe I could have been a better man from the beginning. The federal prosecutor called that night. Harrison Mills had been arrested trying to bribe a federal agent. The war was over. Now came the hard part, living with their choices. Starting over at 35 was supposed to be terrifying until you realized you were finally building something worth keeping. The one-bedroom apartment in East Austin wasn't much compared to the penthouse they'd lost. Thin walls, older appliances, a view of the parking lot instead of the skyline. But it was theirs, paid for with Keisha's savings and Bryce's final paycheck from the company he'd helped destroy. This is cozy, Keisha said, surveying their new living room. All their furniture fit in a space that used to be their walk-in closet. That's one word for it. She found him standing at the kitchen window, watching their neighbors go about ordinary Monday morning routines. People heading to jobs that actually produce something instead of managing inherited wealth. Having regrets? About the apartment? No. He turned to face her. About everything else? Also no. The coffee maker gurgled to life. A wedding gift from her mother that had somehow avoided federal seizure. Small victories. The Morrison settlement cleared yesterday, she said, checking her phone. $25 million to his family foundation. Full recognition of his father's patents. Scholarship fund for engineering students. That's good. The employee pension fund is fully restored. Everyone keeps their retirement. Also good. And we're officially broke. How broke? Ramen noodles for dinner broke. Walking to work broke. Shopping at thrift stores broke. He laughed, surprising them both. You know what? I don't care. Really? Really? I've never worked for anything in my life. Everything was handed to me, inherited, assumed. Maybe it's time to find out who I am when I actually have to earn it. What's the difference between having everything and having enough? Which one makes you happier in the end? Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother in Atlanta, saw the news. Are you okay? She typed back, better than okay, starting fresh. With that man of yours. With that man of mine. Good. Fresh starts are when you find out what really matters. Bryce found work at a small tech startup downtown. Entry-level programming, the kind of job he could have gotten fresh out of college if he'd ever needed to work. His new colleagues treated him like any other guy trying to make rent, not the heir to a corporate dynasty. For the first time in his life, he was valued for what he could do, not who his grandfather had been. How's the commute? Keisha asked over dinner of pasta and Jared sauce. 2 miles. I'm thinking of buying a bike. A bike. Novel concept, right? Physical exercise as transportation. She was working freelance legal consulting, taking on cases for small businesses and startup companies. The work paid less than her corporate salary, but felt more meaningful. I got 3 new clients today, she said, winding spaghetti around her fork. A woman starting a catering business, a veteran opening a security firm, and a nonprofit that helps kids aging out of foster care. That's great. It's different. Instead of helping rich people get richer, I'm helping people build something from nothing. That night, they made love on their cheap mattress in their tiny bedroom with thin walls and neighbors who probably heard everything. It felt more real than any night in his penthouse. "I love you," she whispered against his neck afterward. "I love you too. Even broke, especially broke." 6 months later, her mother visited from Atlanta. The experimental treatment had worked. She was cancer-free and planning a return to teaching. "This place is small," she observed, looking around their apartment. "But it's ours," Keisha said proudly. "Every stick of furniture, every dish, every book. We earned all of it. And how's married life treating you?" Keisha looked at Bryce, who was attempting to cook dinner in their galley kitchen, singing off-key to music only he could hear. "He's different now. We both are. Different how? He's not trying to be someone he thinks I want him to be. He's just being who he is. And who he is turns out to be pretty wonderful. And you, I stopped waiting for him to disappoint me." Her mother smiled. "That's what real love looks like. Not the fairy tale kind, but the kind that builds something together." That night, Bryce proposed again, with a ring from a pawn shop and words he'd never said to anyone before. "I know we're already married, but I want to marry you. The real you, the real me, the real us." She said yes, obviously, but this time it wasn't a contract. It was a promise. Sometimes the past you thought you'd buried comes back wearing a lawyer's suit and carrying evidence that could change everything you built. The law office Keisha had opened in a converted warehouse near the Austin Arts District buzzed with the kind of controlled chaos that came with actually helping people instead of just billing them. Her paralegal stuck her head through the door. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's about the Whitmore case." Keisha looked up from the small business contract she was reviewing. "Tell them the Whitmore case is closed. Has been for 8 months. She says she's James Morrison's granddaughter." The pen slipped from Keisha's fingers. Elena Morrison was everything her grandfather wasn't. Young, confident, and carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than Keisha's monthly rent. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for seeing me. It's just Keisha now, and you're welcome. How's your grandfather?" "Thriving, actually. The settlement money allowed us to move him to a much better facility. He's even started writing again, documenting everything that happened to our family." "That's wonderful." Elena sat down, placing her briefcase carefully on the desk between them. "But that's not why I'm here." She opened the case and pulled out a thick folder. "My grandfather kept everything. Every letter, every legal document, every piece of correspondence from the original lawsuit, including things that weren't turned over during discovery." Keisha's stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" "Evidence that your husband's grandfather wasn't working alone. He had partners. Silent partners who are still alive, still profiting from stolen technology." The folder contained corporate records, wire transfer receipts, and correspondence that painted a picture of conspiracy stretching far beyond the Whitmore family crimes. Harrison Mills, 3 federal judges, a former Secretary of Commerce, 2 Fortune 100 CEOs, all of them still alive, all of them still powerful. "Why are you bringing this to me?" "Because you're the only person who had the courage to do the right thing, even when it costs you everything. And because my grandfather specifically asked for you." Have you ever thought you were finished with a fight, only to discover the fight wasn't finished with you? How do you handle battles you didn't choose but can't ignore? That evening, Keisha spread the new evidence across their apartment's tiny dining table. Bryce sat across from her, reading through documents that could send some of the country's most powerful people to prison. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "Does it? These people destroyed families, stole billions, perverted the justice system for decades. And they're still out there doing it. And going after them could destroy the life we've built." They looked around their small apartment, their books mixed together on improvised shelves, photos from their real wedding ceremony at the courthouse, her mother's paintings on walls they'd painted themselves. "What do you think we should do?" he asked. "I think we should ask ourselves what kind of people we want to be. The kind who mind their own business and protect what they have. Or the kind who stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of choosing between safety and justice. "Elena Morrison is filing a federal lawsuit next week," Keisha said finally. "With or without our help. And she'll lose without us. These people have resources she can't imagine. They'll bury her in legal fees and procedural challenges until she gives up or goes broke. But with us, she has a chance. Bryce reached across the table and took her hand. When you put it that way, it's not really a choice, is it? Not if we want to look at ourselves in the mirror tomorrow. Then I guess we're going back to war. I guess we are. But this time, they weren't fighting each other. They were fighting together. Victory in court was supposed to feel like vindication, until you realize that sometimes winning means everyone loses something they'll never get back. The federal courthouse in Austin had never seen anything like United States versus Mills at all 12 defendants. 40 years of crimes, evidence that filled 3 conference rooms, and media attention that turned the trial into a national obsession with corruption and power. Keisha sat at the prosecution table as lead counsel, her opening statement still echoing in the courtroom. This case is about stolen dreams and the people brave enough to demand them back. Across the aisle, Harrison Mills and his co-defendants sat behind a wall of expensive lawyers, looking like men who'd never imagined they could be held accountable for anything. The government will present evidence, she continued, that these defendants engaged in a 40-year conspiracy to steal intellectual property, bribe government officials, and destroy competing businesses through systematic legal intimidation. The defense attorney, a man whose fees probably exceeded most people's annual salaries, stood for his response. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about revenge. Pure and simple. Mrs. Whitmore destroyed her own husband's company and now wants to destroy everyone associated with it. But the evidence spoke louder than accusations. Bank records showing millions in bribes. Recorded conversations detailing patent theft. Testimony from victims whose lives had been systematically destroyed. James Morrison, now 81 and in a wheelchair, took the stand on day 12. They didn't just steal my father's work, he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. They stole his pride, his hope, his reason for living. He died thinking he was a failure, never knowing that his innovations would power half the technology we use today. When cross-examination began, the defense attorney made a critical error. Mr. Morrison, isn't it true that your family has received $25 million from Mrs. Whitmore? Doesn't that create an incentive to exaggerate your testimony? The old man's eyes blazed. Son, I lived 70 years knowing my father died, thinking he was worthless. $25 million can't give me back a single conversation with him where he knew the truth. The courtroom was silent for a full minute after that. On day 18, Harrison Mills took the stand in his own defense. I was young, he said. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted. I made mistakes. Keisha stood for cross-examination, 5 years of legal training focused into laser precision. Mr. Mills, you say you made mistakes. Are you referring to the documented bribes to federal judge Patricia Williams in 1987? That was a legitimate consulting fee. For consulting on cases you had pending before her court? I don't recall the specific circumstances. Let me refresh your memory. She held up a bank statement. Wire transfer for $50,000, 3 days before she ruled in your favor on the Morrison patent case. Consulting fee or bribe, Mr. Mills? His lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury saw through 40 years of lies in real time. What's the difference between accountability and revenge? Between justice and destroying people who wronged you? Where's the line? The verdict came back on a Friday afternoon in November. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy, wire fraud, bribery, racketeering. Sentences range from 5 to 20 years in federal prison. Asset forfeiture in the hundreds of millions. Restitution to victims that would take decades to complete. Standing outside the courthouse afterward, Keisha faced a wall of reporters and cameras. Mrs. Whitmore, how does it feel to have won such a significant victory? She looked back at the courthouse steps, where Elena Morrison was helping her grandfather into a car. 2 generations of a family finally seeing justice. It doesn't feel like victory, she said honestly. It feels like doing what should have been done 40 years ago. Any regrets about the personal cost to you and your husband? She found Bryce in the crowd, smiled at him across the sea of reporters and cameras. None whatsoever. That night, they sat in their small apartment, watching news coverage of the trial that had consumed 2 years of their lives. So what now, he asked. Now we go back to our regular lives. Small cases, normal clients, boring problems. Sound perfect. Her mother called from Atlanta. I saw the news. I'm proud of you, baby girl. Thanks, Mama. Your father would have been proud too. The father she'd never mentioned before. The father whose absence had shaped everything about Keisha's need to prove herself worthy of love. Tell me about him. He was a lot like your husband, actually. Someone who made mistakes, but kept trying to do better. Someone who loved deeply, but didn't always know how to show it. What happened to him? Life happened. But the important part is what he left behind. What's that? You. 6 months later, Bryce proposed again. Third time, but who was counting? I keep asking because I keep discovering new reasons to love you, he said, down on one knee in their tiny living room. What's the reason this time? This time it's because you chose justice over safety. You chose what was right over what was easy. And you did it knowing it would cost us everything. It didn't cost us everything. What do we keep? Each other. Is that enough? She pulled him up from the floor, kissed him like she had all the time in the world to answer. It's everything.